The lawyer's words hit me like a physical slap. To Eleanor Margaret Thompson, I leave the lake cabin in Michigan. Victoria actually snorted, literally snorted, while adjusting her designer blazer. I grabbed the rusty key from the mahogany table and walked straight out of that pompous office, leaving my sisters to count their millions. What I discovered 3 hours later in that worthless cabin would turn their smug grins into desperate pleas for mercy. If you're watching this, hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments where you're watching from, because you're about to witness the most satisfying revenge story of the century. I'm Eleanor, but everyone calls me Ellie. At 57, I just spent the last 5 years sacrificing everything to care for my father, the renowned conductor Harold Thompson. While my sisters Victoria and Samantha sent flowers and showed up for holidays with expensive gifts and theatrical tears, I was the one changing his medications, driving him to appointments, and watching his brilliant mind fade away piece by piece. Victoria, at 61, had built her empire in corporate consulting, the kind of woman who charged companies 6 figures to tell them what their own employees already knew. "You were always the maternal one," she'd say whenever I suggested they help more, like being maternal was some kind of genetic defect that made me the designated family caretaker. Samantha, the baby at 49, sold insurance policies to wealthy clients and had perfected the art of looking busy while doing nothing useful. "We contribute financially," she'd add, waving her manicured hand like money could substitute for actually showing up. Right. They contributed checks while I contributed my entire existence. How wonderfully balanced. The reading of Dad's will was supposed to be a formality. At least that's what my sisters assumed while mentally spending their inheritances. Victoria got Thompson Musical Enterprises, Dad's company managing his compositions and recordings, worth multiple millions. Samantha received his investment portfolio, a collection of stocks and bonds that would benefit from her sales expertise. And me? I got a cabin that nobody had visited in years, plus a key so rusty it looked like it belonged in a museum. "Well," Victoria said, her voice dripping with fake sympathy, "I suppose Dad knew who really took good care of him these past few years." The emphasis on "really" was sharp enough to cut glass. Samantha leaned forward, her diamonds catching the light like tiny spotlights announcing her success. "Maybe if you'd been more organized with the caregiving, Ellie, Dad might have felt differently about your capabilities." Oh, the irony was delicious. If only they knew what capabilities I was about to discover. The silence in that room was deafening. Even the lawyer looked uncomfortable, sliding the rusty key across the table like it might bite him. I could hear Victoria whispering to Samantha about splitting the maintenance costs until we can unload that money pit. I stood up slowly, pocketing the key. "Thank you for everything, Dad," I whispered to his photo on the lawyer's desk, then looked directly at my sisters. "I'm sure you'll put your inheritances to excellent use." Walking out of that office, I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. After 5 years of sacrificing everything, Dad had left me the equivalent of pocket change, while my sisters got millions. Maybe I really had been nothing more than the unpaid help all along. The rusty key felt heavy in my pocket, a perfect symbol of how much Dad apparently valued my years of devotion. The 2-hour drive to Lake Michigan gave me plenty of time to process the spectacular display of sisterly love I'd just witnessed. Here I was, 57 years old, unemployed since I'd quit nursing to become Dad's full-time caregiver, living off rapidly depleting savings, and now the proud owner of what Victoria had cheerfully called that old dump. My sisters had inherited millions. I had a rusty key and a Honda with more miles than a NASA space probe. "Perfect," I muttered, taking the exit toward the lake. Just absolutely perfect. But as I drove down the winding dirt road toward the water, something unexpected happened. Instead of wallowing in self-pity like a properly defeated sister should, I found myself remembering golden childhood summers when Mom was still alive, back when our family was actually happy, before competition and resentment had turned us into strangers who shared DNA. The cabin looked exactly as terrible as I'd expected, maybe worse. The blue paint was peeling off like sunburned skin. The front porch sagged like it was tired of holding itself up, and Mom's once beautiful garden looked like nature had declared war and won decisively. Perfect. Apparently Dad's idea of a fair inheritance was giving me a fixer-upper that would cost more to repair than a small country's GDP. How thoughtful. I sat in my car for 10 minutes, staring at the wreckage of childhood memories, when my phone buzzed. Victoria, of course. "Ellie, honey, I know this is hard," she began in that condescending tone she'd perfected. "But we need to be practical about this situation. That place is going to cost a fortune just to make it sellable." Samantha and I were thinking we could help coordinate the repairs, maybe hire some contractors. "How generous of you to manage my inheritance too," I interrupted. "Well, we're family. We help each other." Ah, yes, the family help. Where was that when I was sleeping in hospital chairs while Dad recovered from pneumonia? Oh, right. Victoria was busy restructuring a major corporation, and Samantha was closing important deals. "I'm going to stay here for a while," I announced. "Get the place cleaned up myself." "Stay? Ellie, there's no electricity, probably no running water, and God knows what's living in there." I hung up and turned off my phone. Sometimes the best response to unwanted advice is strategic deafness. Walking up to the front door, I noticed something odd. The lock looked newer than everything else, and when I tried the rusty key from the lawyer, it didn't fit. But there was a small, modern key hidden under the loose floorboard where Dad used to keep the spare, exactly where he'd shown me during our last visit together 3 years ago. Interesting. Dad's memory might have been failing, but apparently his planning skills were still sharp. The inside of the cabin was dusty, but surprisingly well maintained. Someone had been taking care of this place. The electricity worked, the water ran clear, and there was even food in the pantry with recent expiration dates. On the kitchen table sat an envelope with my name written in Dad's unmistakable handwriting. My hands trembled as I opened it, expecting maybe a sentimental goodbye note or instructions for maintaining the property. Instead, I found something that made my knees weak. "My dearest Ellie, if you're reading this, then the first part of my plan worked perfectly. Check the old hiding spot in my study. You'll find the combination hasn't changed. What's inside belongs to you and only you. Use it wisely. The real lesson begins now. All my love, Dad." I stared at that note until the words blurred. Then I read it again. Dad had been planning something, and whatever it was, my sisters had no idea what was coming. I found Dad's study exactly as I remembered. Wood-paneled walls, built-in bookshelves, and his old piano gathering dust in the corner. The old hiding spot he'd mentioned was behind the bookshelf where we used to read together when I was little. When I pulled on the shelf, the entire section swung inward like something out of a mystery movie. Behind it was a wall safe. The combination was Mom's birthday, of course. Dad was nothing if not sentimental. My hands shook as I turned the dial, expecting maybe a few $1,000s in emergency cash and some important papers. Instead, I found something that made me sink to the floor in shock. Several gold coins, some vintage jewelry that had belonged to my grandmother, and file folders containing stock certificates, bonds, and investment documents showing Dad had been quietly buying shares in tech companies for decades. Conservative estimates put the total value at around $3 million. $3 million. Still more money than I'd ever dreamed of having. A note tucked inside one of the folders explained how Dad had accumulated this wealth. "Over 40 years of conducting, I saved and invested every bonus, every royalty check, every unexpected windfall. While your mother and I lived modestly, I built this nest egg one careful investment at a time. I kept it separate from our regular finances, a secret legacy for the daughter who would need it most." I sat on that dusty floor, surrounded by more wealth than I'd ever dreamed possible, and started laughing. Not happy laughter, the kind that comes when reality does a complete backflip and lands somewhere in the twilight zone. Well. Turns out the worthless sister just became the richest one in the family. Dad's sense of irony was apparently as sharp as his conducting skills. My sisters thought they'd gotten the real inheritance while I got the scraps. The truth was so perfectly opposite that even I had to admire Dad's sense of irony. But there was more. Another folder contained documents showing Dad had been systematically withdrawing money from his business and investment accounts over the past 2 years, converting it all to these physical assets. He'd essentially been dismantling his official wealth while building this secret treasure trove. A handwritten note fell out of one folder. "Victoria's company has been propped up by loans for the past year. Without continued funding, it will collapse within months. Samantha's portfolio contains mainly worthless stocks I bought specifically because they were overvalued. I wanted them to learn what struggle feels like, what desperation feels like, what it's like to need help and have nowhere to turn. Just like you felt for 5 years, my darling daughter." I read that note 3 times before the full implications sank in. Dad hadn't just left me money. He'd orchestrated the systematic destruction of my sister's inheritances while secretly building mine. This wasn't just an inheritance, it was revenge, planned with surgical precision. My phone, which I'd turned back on, buzzed with a text from Victoria. "Hope you're settling in okay. Call me if you need anything. Family sticks together." I stared at that heart emoji for a long moment, then typed back, "Thanks, everything's perfect here. Just getting to know my inheritance." If only she knew exactly how well I was getting to know it. Another text came through, this one from Samantha. "Saw some concerning market fluctuations today. Might need to liquidate some positions sooner than expected. Nothing major, just being cautious. Nothing major." Right. I walked back to the hidden safe and ran my fingers over the gold bars Dad had left me. Each one represented years of careful planning, of watching his daughters take him for granted, while the one who actually cared got dismissed as the family caretaker. Time to see exactly how Dad's plan would unfold, and time to discover just how creative I could be with my newfound advantages. 2 weeks later, I was sipping coffee on my newly repaired deck when Victoria called, and her voice had a completely different quality. Smaller, uncertain, nothing like the confident executive I'd grown up resenting. "Ellie, I need to talk to you about something." No pleasantries, no condescending tone, just raw worry. "Of course. What's going on?" I asked, watching a contractor install new windows with money that Victoria assumed I didn't have. "It's the company. We're having some unexpected financial difficulties. Some of our major clients have been pulling out, and there are cash flow issues I don't understand." Cash flow issues. Such a delicate way to say bleeding money like a stuck pig. "That sounds stressful," I said, adding just the right amount of sisterly concern to my voice. "How serious are we talking?" "Serious enough that I might need to sell some assets just to keep the doors open. The whole situation doesn't make sense. Dad always seemed so financially responsible." "Oh, he was responsible all right, just not in the way you expected." "Is there anything I can do to help?" I offered, knowing full well what was coming next. The pause was so long, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. "Well," Victoria's voice got even smaller. "I was wondering if you might be able to lend me some money, just temporarily, until I can stabilize things. Maybe 15 or 20,000? $15,000. 6 months ago, that would have represented my entire emergency fund. Now it was pocket change compared to what Dad had left me. Amazing how Victoria suddenly discovered I existed the moment she needed money. For 30 years, I was just the caregiver, but now I'm apparently family worth asking for help. The timing is absolutely fascinating." "Oh, Victoria," I said, letting genuine disappointment color my voice. "I'm so sorry. Between fixing up the cabin and covering Dad's final expenses, I'm barely scraping by myself. I wish I could help, but..." "Right, of course. I shouldn't have asked. Have you talked to Samantha? Maybe she could..." "Samantha has her own problems right now." "Ah, yes, I bet she does." After we hung up, I couldn't help admiring Dad's timing. He'd planned this so perfectly that both my sisters would hit their financial crises simultaneously, leaving them nowhere to turn but to each other, or to me. My phone rang again within the hour. Samantha this time, and she sounded like she'd been crying. "Ellie, do you have a few minutes? Always have time for family." The irony of that statement wasn't lost on me. "I'm having some challenges with the investment portfolio Dad left me. Some of the positions have performed poorly. Such an elegant way to say crashed and burned. What kind of challenges?" "Significant losses, enough that I'm going to need to make some lifestyle adjustments." Her voice cracked slightly. "I might need to downsize my apartment." "Downsize? From a penthouse to what? A cardboard box under a bridge." "Sam, I'm so sorry. Is there anything I can do?" The same pause Victoria had given me, loaded with pride, swallowing itself. "I was wondering, would you mind if I came up to the lake for a few days, just to clear my head and think through my options? I could help with cabin repairs, contribute to groceries." My youngest sister, who used to spend more on a single dinner than most people made in a week, was offering to split grocery bills. "Of course you can come. When were you thinking? This weekend? If that's not too much trouble." "No trouble at all. It'll be nice to have family here." After I hung up, I walked out onto my restored pier and looked across the lake Dad had loved so much. Both sisters were exactly where his plan had predicted they'd be. Desperate, humbled, and turning to the family member they'd spent years dismissing as irrelevant. But here's what Dad might not have anticipated. I wasn't just going to watch them learn their lesson. I was going to actively teach it. And I was going to enjoy every minute of it. Samantha arrived Friday evening, looking like a designer version of defeat. Her usually perfect hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, her expensive clothes wrinkled from stress, and she'd lost enough weight that her jewelry looked too big for her frame. "The place looks incredible," she said, genuinely amazed, as she walked through what had been a deteriorating cabin and was now a beautifully restored retreat. "Thanks. I found some old investment documents of Dad's in a filing cabinet while cleaning. Apparently he had a small portfolio I didn't know about. Nothing like what you two inherited, but enough to fix this place up properly." The lie came easily. In reality, I'd used part of my secret inheritance to completely restore the cabin, hiring the best contractors money could buy. But my sisters didn't need to know I was now richer than both of them combined. Not yet. We spent the evening talking more honestly than we had in years. Samantha told me about the extent of her financial collapse, not just losing Dad's portfolio, but everything she'd built on top of it. "I kept doubling down," she admitted, staring into her wine glass. "Every time I lost money, I'd invest more aggressively trying to make it back. Classic gambler's fallacy. And I walked right into it. How bad is it really? Bad enough that I'm probably going to lose my apartment next month. Maybe my car too." She laughed bitterly. 6 months ago, I was giving financial advice to millionaires. Now I can't even manage my own expenses. Saturday morning, Victoria arrived, looking equally defeated, but trying harder to hide it. The 3 Thompson sisters together again, though none of us looked quite like we used to. "This is really beautiful, Ellie," Victoria said, examining the restored kitchen. "You've done an amazing job here." "It's been therapeutic," I said, which was true in ways she couldn't imagine. Over lunch, I decided to drop my first strategic bombshell. "I've been thinking about Dad's last few months," I said casually. "Did either of you notice how lucid he seemed sometimes? Like he was more aware than we expected?" Victoria nodded slowly. "There were definitely moments. I thought it might be wishful thinking. What if it wasn't? I let that hang in the air. What if Dad knew exactly what he was doing with his financial decisions?" Samantha set down her sandwich. "What do you mean?" "I mean, Dad was brilliant. Every decision he made in his career was calculated." I looked out over the lake. "What if his final decisions were calculated too? You're saying Dad deliberately left us problematic inheritances?" Victoria's business instincts were kicking in. "I'm saying Dad was disappointed in us, in how we treated him. How we treated each other, how we treated you." I met their eyes. "What if he wanted us to learn something?" The silence that followed was heavy with implications. "Learn what, exactly?" Victoria asked. "What it feels like to struggle, what it feels like to need help, and have people dismiss your problems because they're inconvenient." Samantha started crying. Not the dramatic tears she used to deploy at family gatherings, but real, quiet sobs. "Are you saying this is punishment?" "I'm saying maybe Dad wanted us to understand what really matters before it was too late to change." I stood up, giving them space to process. "I'm going to take a walk. You two should talk." As I headed toward the water, I heard Victoria say to Samantha, "Do you think she knows something she's not telling us?" Smart woman. Too bad it had taken financial ruin to make her start asking the right questions. When I returned an hour later, they were gone, but they'd left a note. "Ellie, thank you for giving us perspective we desperately needed. Let's not wait so long before we see each other again. We love you. V and S." I smiled, folding the note carefully. Phase 1 of my own plan was complete. Time for Phase 2. Over the next month, I got regular calls from both sisters, and watching Dad's plan unfold was like witnessing a masterpiece of psychological warfare. Victoria's company was hemorrhaging money faster than she could patch the holes. Major clients were pulling out, citing shifting priorities, though I suspected Dad had arranged some of those departures before his death. "I don't understand it," Victoria told me during one of her increasingly frequent crisis calls. "Everything Dad built is falling apart, but it's happening so systematically it almost seems intentional." Meanwhile, I was having entirely too much fun being the supportive sister while secretly accelerating their downfall. Using my newfound wealth carefully, I'd hired a discreet financial advisor who specialized in competitive business strategies. With his help, I invested in companies that competed directly with Victoria's business and funded a startup developing automated consulting software that could do Victoria's job for a fraction of the cost. "Have you considered pivoting the business model?" I suggested during one call, knowing full well that any pivot would require capital she didn't have. "With what resources?" Victoria laughed bitterly. "I'm already operating on borrowed money." For Samantha, my advisor took a different approach. He identified the weakest stocks in her inherited portfolio and executed perfectly legal but strategically timed trades that accelerated their natural decline. Turns out having a team of professionals dedicated to creative problem-solving can be remarkably effective. Who knew money could buy such excellent revenge consulting services? The market's been brutal this month, she complained during her weekly meltdown calls. It's like every position I hold is cursed. Maybe it's just bad luck, I said sympathetically, while checking the computer screen showing how much money I'd made betting against her investments. The best part was how they'd both started treating me like their emotional support sister. Victoria called me whenever she needed to vent about business disasters. Samantha texted me daily updates about her job search and apartment hunting. You're the only person I can talk to about this, Victoria told me. You understand struggle in a way Sam and I never did before. Oh, the irony was delicious. But I wasn't content to just watch them suffer from a distance. It was time for some hands-on education. Why don't you both come up to the lake this weekend? I suggested. Sometimes getting away from the city helps put things in perspective. I can't really afford the gas money, Samantha admitted. My treat, I said generously. Family takes care of family, right? They both arrived Sunday afternoon, looking like refugees from their former lives. Victoria's designer wardrobe had been replaced by discount store clothing. Samantha's jewelry was gone, sold, she explained, to cover rent. We spent the afternoon on the lake, fishing like we used to as children. For a few hours, it almost felt like we were sisters again instead of players in Dad's elaborate game. That evening, as we sat around the fire pit I'd had installed, Victoria asked the question I'd been waiting for. Ellie, can I ask you something personal? Of course. How did you do it? All those years taking care of Dad, being responsible for everything, never complaining. I poked at the fire, considering my answer carefully. I suppose I just focused on what mattered most, which was what? Love, family, being there when someone needed me. I looked directly at her. Not everyone gets to learn those lessons the easy way. Samantha was crying again. We failed you, didn't we? All those years. We all made choices, I said gently. The question is what we choose to do now. What can we do? Victoria asked. We're both basically broke. Our careers are in ruins. We have nothing left to offer anyone. I smiled, stirring the fire. Maybe that's exactly where you need to be to figure out what you actually have to offer. They were both quiet for a long time, staring into the flames. I used to want to teach, Victoria said suddenly. I remember, I said. I used to dream about working with children, Samantha added. Before I got obsessed with making money. Those dreams don't disappear, I told them. They just wait for you to remember them. As they prepared to leave the next morning, Victoria hugged me longer than she had in years. Thank you, she whispered, for not giving up on us. That's what family does, I said. After they left, I walked back to Dad's hidden safe and ran my fingers over the documents that had made all this possible. Phase 2 was complete. Both sisters were exactly where Dad's plan had predicted. Humbled, desperate, and finally open to learning what really mattered. But I wasn't quite ready to end their education yet. Time for the final lesson. The call came at 2 a.m. on a Tuesday. Victoria, sobbing so hard, I could barely understand her words. Ellie, I'm so sorry to wake you, but I didn't know who else to call. I sat up in bed, genuinely concerned, despite everything. What's wrong? They're foreclosing on the company building. Tomorrow. I have to be out by noon, and I don't know where to put 20 years of files and equipment. She was hyperventilating now. David's threatening divorce. He says he can't watch me destroy myself anymore. I think I'm having a panic attack. For the first time since discovering Dad's inheritance, I felt a stab of actual guilt. This wasn't just financial pressure anymore. This was complete psychological breakdown. Victoria, listen to me. Breathe. Just breathe. I can't do this anymore. Ellie, I've lost everything. Everything. I found myself getting dressed while still on the phone. I'm driving down. Don't make any decisions until I get there. You don't have to. Yes, I do. That's what family does. 3 hours later, I was standing in Victoria's corporate office, or what used to be her corporate office. Half the furniture was already gone, sold to pay debts. Box after box of files sat waiting to be moved to nowhere. Victoria looked like she'd aged a decade in the past month. Her hands shook constantly now, and she'd developed a nervous tic of checking her phone every few seconds. I keep thinking Dad would be so disappointed, she said, loading files into boxes with mechanical movements. He built something real, something lasting, and I destroyed it all in 6 months. Did you destroy it? I asked. Or did you inherit something that was already broken? She looked up at me sharply. What do you mean? This was it. Decision time. Decision? I could keep letting Dad's plan play out to its bitter conclusion, or I could choose a different ending. Victoria, sit down. There's something I need to tell you. The next hour was one of the hardest conversations I'd ever had. I told her about the safe, about Dad's hidden wealth, about his deliberate sabotage of both their inheritances. $3 million, she whispered. and growing thanks to some good investments. You've known this whole time? I nodded, waiting for the explosion of anger, and there it was. You watched us suffer. Victoria's voice cracked with fury. You had the power to help us, and you just watched. I watched you learn what actually matters, I said steadily, but my hands were trembling. That's not your decision to make. She stood up, pacing around the boxes. You're not God, Ellie. You don't get to decide what lessons we need to learn, don't I? For 5 years you decided I needed to learn what sacrifice meant. You decided my life was less important than your careers. You decided, so this is revenge? Victoria's eyes were blazing. Elaborate, calculated revenge? This is justice, I said quietly. The silence stretched between us, heavy with years of accumulated pain and fresh betrayal. Finally, Victoria sank back into her chair. I should hate you right now. You probably should, but I don't. She looked around at the ruins of her business empire. Because you're right. I did need to lose everything to remember who I was supposed to be. The anger wasn't gone. I could see it still simmering beneath the surface, but something else was there too. Understanding. Apparently, nothing says life lesson learned quite like discovering your baby sister is secretly richer than both of you combined. The educational value of irony really is priceless. She stood up and hugged me. Dad was right. I needed to lose everything to find out who I really was. So what do you want to do now? Victoria looked out the window at the Chicago skyline she'd spent decades trying to conquer. I want to teach. I want to work with kids who love music the way we used to. That can be arranged. She laughed again. With Dad's money? With our money. All 3 of us, working together on something that matters. My phone buzzed. Samantha, texting that she'd been evicted and was sleeping in her car. Ready to rescue our baby sister? I asked. Victoria wiped her eyes and picked up her purse. Let's go save Sam. We found Samantha in a McDonald's parking lot, living out of a Honda Accord that had seen better decades. When she saw us walking toward her car, she tried to pretend everything was fine. Hey, what are you 2 doing here? Staging an intervention, Victoria said gently. Everything's under control, Samantha lied, her voice bright and false. Just between apartments right now. I knocked on her car window. Sam, open the door. It's time to stop pretending. What followed was another tearful revelation, but Samantha's reaction was different from Victoria's. Where Victoria had eventually found understanding, Samantha felt betrayed. $3 million, she said flatly, staring at the hotel room carpet. You had $3 million while I was sleeping in my car. Sam, no. She held up her hand. Just no. I need time to process this. She didn't speak to me for the rest of the evening, and the next morning she was gone, leaving only a note. I need space to figure out how I feel about everything. Don't contact me for a while. Victoria was more conflicted. I understand why you did it, she said over coffee that morning. But understanding doesn't make it hurt less. I know. Do you? Because for months, you watched me have panic attacks. You listened to me cry about losing everything, and you could have stopped it with a phone call. Would you have learned anything if I had? Do you? I asked quietly. Both my sisters looked at me like I'd asked if the sky was blue. Ellie, Victoria said, you're the only one of us who never lost sight of what mattered, even when we were horrible to you. Especially when we were horrible to you, Samantha added. I felt tears starting, not manipulative tears or angry tears, but relief, pure, exhausting relief. So what now? Victoria asked. The road to rebuilding our relationships wasn't smooth or quick. Samantha didn't speak to me for 2 months. When she finally called, her first words were, I'm still angry with you. I know. But I also understand why you did it, and I hate that I understand. Victoria was quicker to forgive, but slower to trust. Our early conversations were stilted, careful, like we were dancing around a landmine. I keep wondering what else you're not telling me, she admitted during one tense phone call. Nothing, I said. The secrets are over. Are they? Because if you could lie about millions of dollars for months, what else might you be hiding? It took time. Real time, measured in awkward family dinners and carefully worded text messages, before we found our way back to something that felt like sisterhood. But eventually, we did. And when we were ready, I pulled out the folder of plans I'd been developing. Now we build something Dad would be proud of. 6 months later, I was standing in the main hall of what would soon become the Thompson Center for Musical Education, watching contractors install sound equipment while Victoria worked with our architect on classroom layouts. The building had been a defunct community center on Chicago's South Side, perfect for what we had in mind. With Dad's inheritance, we'd purchased it, renovated it completely, and we're now weeks away from opening our doors to children who couldn't afford traditional music lessons. The piano room is going to be beautiful, Victoria said, joining me in the main hall. She looked healthier than she had in years. The stress lines had faded, replaced by the kind of excitement I remembered from our childhood. Samantha walked in carrying coffee and financial reports. "The scholarship fund is fully endowed," she announced. "We can provide free music education for 200 children the first year, with capacity to grow." It was remarkable how natural this partnership had become. Victoria had completed her teaching certification and would run the educational programs. Samantha had channeled her sales skills into fundraising and community outreach. I managed operations and coordinated with the social services agencies who would refer students to us. But the real magic was simpler than that. We'd finally learned to work together instead of competing with each other. "I got a call from the Chicago Tribune," Victoria said. "They want to do a feature story about the center." "What did you tell them?" "That we'll consider it after we've actually helped some children." Samantha laughed. "Look at us, turning down publicity. Dad would be so confused." We'd agreed never to publicly discuss Dad's true inheritance or the circumstances that had led us here. As far as anyone knew, we'd pooled our modest inheritances to start a family foundation. The truth was more complicated, but also more private. "Speaking of Dad," I said, "I have something for both of you." I handed them each an envelope containing copies of a letter I'd found in Dad's safe the week before, one I hadn't shown them during our emotional reunion. They read silently, and I watched their expressions change from curiosity to understanding to something that looked like peace. The letter was addressed to all three of us. "My dearest daughters, if you're reading this together, then my plan worked better than I dared hope. You've learned to forgive each other, to value what matters, and to work as a team. The money was never the real inheritance. $3 million is enough to be comfortable, but not enough to replace the need for purpose and family. I wanted you to build something meaningful together, something that would outlast any bank account. The real inheritance is the family you choose to be from now on. All my love, always, Dad." We stood there in our unfinished music center, crying and laughing and holding each other like we should have been doing all along. "He planned this too," Victoria said wonderfully. "This moment, right here." "Of course he did," Samantha said. "Dad never did anything without a backup plan for the backup plan." I looked around at what we'd built together, not just the building, but the partnership, the trust, the genuine love we'd rediscovered for each other. "I think," I said, "this might be his masterpiece." The grand opening of the Thompson Center was everything we dreamed it would be and more. 50 children from across Chicago's South Side filled our classrooms, their faces bright with the kind of excitement that comes from discovering something you didn't know you were missing. 8-year-old Marcus, who lived with his grandmother in a housing project, sat at our best piano picking out melodies with the focused intensity of a future concert pianist. 12-year-old Sophia, whose family had immigrated from El Salvador, was learning violin with tears of joy streaming down her face. Victoria moved between the classrooms like she'd been born to teach, patient with beginners and challenging for advanced students. Watching her work with children, I could see the person she'd always meant to be. Samantha had surprised everyone by developing a gift for working with parents, helping families navigate not just the music program, but connecting them with other social services they needed. Her sales background had translated perfectly into advocacy work. "Mrs. Thompson?" Marcus's grandmother approached me after the first day of classes. "I just wanted to thank you. Marcus hasn't stopped humming since he got home yesterday." "That's what we were hoping for," I said. "But it's more than that. He's different, happier, like he found something he didn't know he was looking for." That night, the three of us sat on the deck of the lake cabin, sharing a bottle of wine and watching the sunset paint the water gold. "Did you ever imagine we'd end up here?" Victoria asked. "Working together?" "Never," I admitted. "Loving each other? I always hoped." Samantha raised her glass. "To Dad, who knew us better than we knew ourselves. To second chances," Victoria added. "To family," I concluded. "The kind we choose to be." We drank our wine and listened to the loons calling across the water. The sound Dad had always said was the most beautiful music in the world because it was both individual and harmonious. Separate voices creating something larger than themselves, just like us. A year later, the Thompson Center had expanded to serve 400 children and had a waiting list of 200 more. We'd opened satellite programs in 2 other underserved neighborhoods and were planning a summer camp at the lake cabin. But the real measure of our success wasn't in numbers. It was in moments like watching Victoria conduct the children's choir, seeing Samantha teach a shy teenager to believe in herself, or getting letters from parents whose children had discovered confidence through music. One evening, I found a note tucked into Dad's piano bench at the cabin, a piece of paper I'd somehow missed during all my previous searches. It was in Dad's handwriting, but it was recent, dated just days before his death. Eleanor, you were always my proudest achievement, not because you sacrificed for me, but because you never lost your capacity to love people even when they didn't deserve it. That gift will heal our family when the time comes. Trust in that gift, and trust in the plan. Love, Dad. I sat at the piano and played one of Dad's compositions, a simple melody he'd written for our childhood summers at this very cabin. Through the window, I could see Victoria and Samantha setting up for a small dinner party we were hosting for the center's board members. 3 years ago, we'd been strangers who shared a last name and a bitter history. Tonight, we were sisters, partners, and friends who'd built something beautiful together. Dad's plan had worked perfectly, but more than that, we'd taken his plan and made it our own, creating something even better than he'd imagined. The real inheritance wasn't the money, the lessons, or even the love we'd rediscovered. It was the family we'd chosen to become. 2 years after opening the Thompson Center, we faced our first real crisis as partners. The city was threatening to shut down our Southside location due to zoning complaints from a developer who wanted to build luxury condos on the block. They're offering us triple what we paid for the building, Samantha said, reviewing the legal papers during our weekly planning meeting. And they'll relocate us to a facility in the suburbs, Victoria added. Better parking, newer building, easier for families with cars. I looked at the photos covering our conference room walls. Hundreds of children who discovered music in this specific building, in this specific neighborhood, walking distance from their homes. How many of our current students have cars? I asked. Samantha checked her files. Maybe 20% of families own vehicles, so we'd be relocating to serve different children, not the same ones. The suburban facility would serve children too, Victoria pointed out. Maybe children who also need what we're offering. It was our first major disagreement as partners, and for a moment I felt the old family dynamics trying to reassert themselves. Victoria being practical, Samantha focused on the financial opportunity, me worrying about the people who'd be left behind. But something had changed in all of us over the past few years. Let's table this decision, Victoria said. I want to spend some time in the classrooms this week, really listening to our students and families. I'll research other potential locations in the neighborhood, Samantha added. Maybe there are options we haven't considered. And I'll meet with the city council, I said. See if there's any way to address the zoning issues without relocating. A week later, we reconvened with completely different perspectives. Victoria had spent hours talking with students and parents. 90% of them said they wouldn't be able to continue lessons if we moved to the suburbs. This isn't just about music education, it's about community. Samantha had found 3 alternative buildings within walking distance. 2 of them would actually be cheaper to operate, and the third has space for expansion. I discovered that the zoning complaints were bogus, filed by the developer's lawyers to create artificial pressure. The city council is actually supportive of keeping us in the neighborhood. They're willing to fast-track permits for renovations. So we fight, Victoria said. We fight smart, Samantha corrected. I've already started organizing the parents into an advocacy group. And I've contacted every journalist who covered our opening, I added. Amazing how much community support appears when people understand what's at stake. The developer withdrew his complaints 2 weeks later, after a series of community meetings that drew hundreds of supporters and significant media attention. We used the experience to launch a permanent advocacy program, helping other community organizations fight similar battles. But the real victory wasn't keeping our building. It was discovering that we'd become the kind of partners who could handle conflict without destroying what we'd built together. Dad would be proud, Victoria said as we celebrated with pizza in our rescued conference room. Of the advocacy work? Samantha asked. Of us, I said. Of how we handled disagreement without tearing each other apart. That night, I updated the letter I'd been writing to Dad, something I'd started doing after we opened the center, as a way of keeping him informed about how his plan was working out. Dear Dad, I wrote. Today we had our first real fight as partners, and we survived it. More than survived, we grew stronger. I think that might be the most important lesson of all. Love, Ellie. 5 years after Dad's death, on the anniversary of the day I'd first walked into that rusty lake cabin, the 3 Thompson sisters sat on our restored pier, watching the sunrise paint the water silver and gold. The Thompson Center now operated in 5 locations across Chicago, serving over 1,000 children annually. We'd launched a teacher training program, established partnerships with the city's public schools, and created a scholarship fund that would operate in perpetuity. But more importantly, we'd become the family Dad had always dreamed we could be. "I have an announcement," Victoria said, pulling an envelope from her jacket pocket. "Please tell me you're not quitting," Samantha said. "We just got the hang of working together." Victoria laughed. "No, nothing like that, but I did get an offer I wanted to discuss with both of you." She handed us the letter. It was from the MacArthur Foundation, offering Victoria a fellowship to study innovative approaches to music education in underserved communities. "It's a huge honor," I said, reading the details, "and a huge opportunity. It would mean traveling for research, maybe being away for months at a time," Victoria explained. "I wanted to make sure you were both comfortable with me pursuing it. 3 years ago, this would have been a crisis. Victoria leaving would have felt like abandonment, like her prioritizing her career over family again. Now it felt like growth." "Of course you should do it," Samantha said immediately. "Think about what you could learn, what you could bring back to the center, and think about the recognition it would bring to our work," I added. "This isn't Victoria leaving the family business. This is the family business getting national attention." Victoria's eyes filled with tears. "You really mean that?" "We mean it," I said. "Besides, Sam and I are perfectly capable of keeping things running while you're off being brilliant." "Hey," Samantha protested. "I'm brilliant too." "Fine, while you're both off being brilliant in different places." We laughed, the kind of easy, comfortable laughter that had taken years to rediscover. Later that morning, I walked alone to Dad's grave for the first time since his funeral. I'd avoided it for years, too angry and too hurt to face the finality of his death. But now, I had things to tell him. "Hi, Dad," I said, sitting cross-down beside his headstone. "I thought you'd want a progress report." I told him about the center, about the children whose lives had been changed by music, about the partnerships we'd built, and the community we'd created. I told him about Victoria's fellowship and Samantha's plans to start a nonprofit consulting business. I told him about the family dinners we shared every Sunday, and the way his granddaughter Sophia, Victoria's daughter, had started calling all 3 of us Aunt. "But mostly," I said, "I wanted to thank you for knowing us better than we knew ourselves, for believing we could be better than we were, for having the courage to risk everything on the possibility that love could win." The wind rustled through the trees above his grave, and for a moment I could almost hear his voice. "That wasn't courage, my dear. That was faith." As I walked back to my car, I thought about the woman I'd been 5 years ago, bitter, isolated, convinced that sacrifice meant suffering in silence. I thought about the woman I was now, confident, connected, surrounded by family and meaningful work. The inheritance Dad had left me wasn't just money or life lessons. It was the chance to become the person I was always meant to be. That evening, the 3 of us gathered for our traditional Sunday dinner at the lake cabin. Victoria brought her famous lasagna. Samantha contributed salad and wine, and I provided dessert and the setting. "I've been thinking," Samantha said as we cleared the dishes, "about what Dad would say if he could see us now. Probably that we took too long to figure it out," Victoria suggested. "Or that we exceeded his expectations," I countered. We stood at the kitchen window, looking out at the lake where we'd played as children and fought as adults, and finally found our way back to each other as sisters. "You know what I think he'd say?" Samantha asked. "What?" "He'd say the real inheritance was the family we became along the way." We groaned at the terrible joke, then laughed until our sides hurt, the way only sisters can. Outside, the loons were calling across the water, their voices weaving together in perfect harmony while maintaining their distinct songs, just like us. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.